Well, greetings again to the brightest audience in America, and welcome back to the Walt Brown controversy. We've been doing a lot of things. We just got done with Walt Brown's notes of mediation, and let me show you how to get what we've been talking about. I'm so excited about this. Let's make that smaller, that bigger. What you do is you just go into, let's start from scratch. We'll go into the hydroplate.org. Okay, hydroplate.org is where you're going. And it whirls and grinds and whirls and grinds, and hopefully it works. Unbelievable. What's happening here? Oh, boy. Sorry about that. Well, while that's doing that, I'll just show you. This is where we're trying to get to, this timeline. And it's got the letter from Brown to Morris. That's the one we want to do right now. Hydroplate timeline. Yeah, let's see. Why is this not working? Okay, yeah, well, this one might be working. Hydroplate.org. Is that going to work? Oh, maybe somebody's working on the page. That wouldn't be good. Okay, well, we'll go to, let's see. Oh, there we go, hydroplate.org. Let's go to the hydroplate controversy. Let's go up to the timeline, which is really, 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 really cool. So you just click on it, and this is what we've done. You can click on it, you can see what it's there, and we want to skim ahead here. We've gone to all these letters in the previous rounds. We got up to June of 1994. That's the one we were at. Whoa, where was that? What happened there? June of 1994, somewhere in there. Okay. And this is what this Brown to Coppage, that was to set up the arbitration, and that was agreed upon. And then ICR and Steve Austin backed out 4 days before it. And they said, we'll do mediation. And Walt Brown didn't want to do that, but he did. Okay, and what did we just do here? Letter. Okay, wait a minute. Yeah, we want his mediation. Okay. Austin to Robinson, Brown to Robinson. Okay, this is what we just did. Personal memorandum of mediation between Brown, Morris, and Austin, which was conducted on June 21st. So we just did this one. This is probably the best one of all these. It's controversy, mediation notes by Walt Brown. I encourage people to go through it. You can just read it on yourself. But if you want to have it playing when you're driving, this was pretty eye-opening, especially the part where Austin got caught lying. Okay, but let's see here. That was down at the bottom of that page. So what happens after this? Dr. Holroyd's paper to the Third International Conference on Creationism, acknowledging Brown independently produced his lake, Grand Lake, at 5,700 feet. Holroyd also now questions the existence of his own lake. And this is such a neat tool. And you can go in, you can see all this stuff, see for yourself what they say. Man, this is such, whoever, the person who put this website together, man, this is top notch right here. Okay, and then there was a letter from Brown to Robinson. There was a letter from Austin to Robinson. So this is what their emails are going back and forth after the mediation. They're still trying to get the end note 40 cleaned up, and the Radis sheet, worded quite properly. And we've read these already on previous emails, and we've done this one. What was this one? This one was complete letter from Peter Robinson, head of the mediation board. And I think he was the only one that actually read the material for the mediation, to Walt Brown and Steve Austin, telling Austin to use the name Grand Lake because that was a name given to it by its discoverer, Walt Brown. Dated September of 21st of 94. Another letter outlining the mediation panel ruling. Robinson to Brown and Austin. I think we've read all of these. And then Austin to Robinson. So they're trying to push back on what he's decided. Robinson to Brown and Austin, November. And I think we did that November one already. November, let's see here, Pepperdine University. Yeah, they're just kind of going back and forth on what the end notes should be. And let's do this letter from, let's do this next one. Okay, December 29th, 1994, letter from Brown to Morris. Okay, This is December 29th, 1994, and we get to see the actual letterhead. I love this. This is the Center for Scientific Creation. That's Walt Brown's organization. And let's see, it's from Dr. Walt Brown, and it's going to Dr. Henry Morris, dated December 29, 1994. Let's see. I just want to make sure you're seeing what I'm seeing. Do you see what I see? Yes, you do. Okay. Okay, dear Henry, your entire letter of December 20th is produced below. I will comment on each portion of it. Morris writes, I have read your letter dated December 14th to our ICR board members. It was our understanding when we sent you the names and addresses of our board members that you would be sending them only the joint statement by the chairman of our mediation team as part of the 50 key people desired to have this statement. Brown replies, when you say it was our understanding, the reader has the false impression that our refers to you and me, therefore I broke an agreement we had. Instead, you mean you and Don Rohr had the understanding. I never had that understanding, nor did I ever make such a commitment. On October 5th, 1994, when I asked Don for the names and addresses of your board members, he refused. Trying to keep information from your board members is a mistake, in my opinion. I then wrote back and explained why I needed them. Then Peter Robinson asked me to provide him with pre-printed labels Peter Robinson had asked me to provide him with pre-printed labels by October 19th for up to 50 people who would receive Peter's letter. When Dan finally faxed me the names and addresses, he attached a note saying, it is requested that these names and addresses be used only for this purpose. I never agreed to that. I had no plans then to communicate directly with your two boards. Only on December 11th did I make that decision. Morris, our agreement was, of course, that if the two sides could not agree on the content of this joint statement, then both sides would be bound by the compromise statement prepared by the chairman of the mediation table. The agreement stipulated that Peter Robinson will draft the final language based on the input from Brown and Austin. Well, Dr. Brown says, what you say is correct, but incomplete and therefore misleading. Our mediation on June 21st ended with a good agreement for everyone. It had three parts. One, an errata sheet would be placed in each unsold Grand Canyon book if 1,000 or more remained. Peter would resolve any disagreements on what were and were not errors. The errors would not be repeated in future printings. 2, neither side would attack the other's integrity. 3, a letter would be sent to up to the 50 people I selected. A letter would be sent to up to 50 people I selected, people who had heard or inquired about this conflict or who had some need to know, such as board members. They would receive a letter stating what happened. As you said, Peter was to write the letter if Steve and I could not agree on its wording. No one outside our organization would be told of the matter. If someone asked, they would be given a copy of the letter. Steve broke the agreement by blocking number 1 above. He continually evaded my frequent question, how many books remained? That question had to be answered before work on an errata sheet could begin. Steve delayed and misled for 3 months until the book's inventory was almost zero. Attachment A gives the chronology. Okay, Morris. In any case, you have now chosen to make your accusations and threats to both our board and our technical advisory board. Because our full board does not meet again until January 21st, I will ask one of the local members of the board to review the entire file in time to make recommendations to the board at the meeting. The technical advisory board never has meetings and would not be involved in any decisions. Brown. I know your technical board has no meetings, but they are to give technical advice. I assume you are open to their technical advice and they are willing to give it. Their names and function are prominently listed on ICR stationery. I hope it's more than window dressing. If not, it's misleading. This reminds me of how ICR listed me in your graduate school catalog from 1981, 1982 as a member of your graduate school faculty. I was not, nor was the subject ever raised with me. That was too misleading, or that too was misleading. I will be happy to delay my actions until after your January 21st board meeting. I hope ICR will acknowledge and correct the two problems that were the subject of our year-long correspondence. 1, false derogatory statements, and 2, plagiarism. Maybe we can get back to the 3 elements of our June 21st agreement listed above. After your local board member has studied the entire file, he might want to contact me by phone to verify that we are looking at the same evidence. Doing so before your board meeting might simplify matters. I must disengage from this controversy as soon as possible. It has taken way too much of my time. I was willing to devote the time and effort of it in hopes of resolving it quietly and privately for the good of the creation movement. Morris writes, I would strongly urge you not to carry out your threat to air this material before the enemies of the gospel. This would hurt not only ICR, but the cause of Christ and creationism in general. Has your board authorized this threat? Do they really agree that it would be right for you to do such a thing? Brown responds, as I wrote you in my letter dated December 14th, my board members unanimously agree with these steps. Morris writes, please remind your board first of the mediation agreement, which you endorsed on June 21st in the presence of 6 witnesses. This agreement includes the following commitments. Communication regarding disputes between parties will not be circulated to anyone. All parties agree not to make comments that will attack the other's integrity. Brown, responds, again, Steve broke the agreement. 3 times I wrote Peter and you or Steve explaining why I considered the agreement broken. The letters were ignored. An appropriate response by you, Henry, would have been an apology with a promise to get things back on track or to make amends. I would have accepted either one. Minutes after our mediation session began, you asked who could be told what transpired at the mediation. I suggested that we address that question at the end of the mediation. Everyone agreed. When that time came, you said that people at ICR were aware of the conflict and would want to know what happened. You wanted to inform them. I concurred and added that we have a responsibility to keep our board members informed as well. Any communication I have with your board members is therefore not a violation. I have not communicated either orally or in writing anything about the mediation outside our organization. That will continue. Reference to what happened at the mediation will be removed from what is mailed out. Morris, once again, as we have often done before, we categorically deny all your charges. Brown responds, if you and Steve have done nothing wrong, then my giving copies of the file to a few others will do you no harm. It could harm me. Even an enemy of the gospel would make a serious mistake if he accepted and repeated my charges without being able to back them up with what you and Steve wrote. Otherwise, you could cut their accusations to ribbons and discredit them when the charges were aired. But if you and Steve have done something wrong and will not acknowledge and correct it, then your decision to continue stonewalling will hurt our common cause. We both know that the 3 people who will receive the file will read it over very carefully. The issues are ethics and integrity, not creation and evolution. I presume you are aware of the prominent cases of plagiarisms that have made headlines in the scientific literature during the last several months. This is most serious. Morris, we finally agreed at your insistence to go to the mediation group. Brown, not quite. I wanted our dispute arbitrated, not mediated. Arbitration is binding and legally enforceable. Mediation seeks compromise. Only by having an independent, hopefully diligent person decide the truth of this matter could we put it behind us. I was willing to live by an arbitrator's decision. My opposition to mediation was that many mediators seek harmony by splitting the difference. They also tend to not push hard to get at the truth, because that could create disharmony. Peace at any price may be their objective. After many months, you and Steve finally agreed to arbitration. Once again, After many months, you and Steve finally agreed to arbitration. While we were looking for a fair and thorough arbitrator, you both said you wanted mediation, not arbitration. Finally, we compromised by agreeing to mediate first and then arbitrate any unresolved matters. That was the understanding I and the conflict resolution attorneys had for several months. Steve, and I believe you also, then retained a personal attorney. I was asked if Steve could be present at the mediation arbitration. I agreed. Then just 2 working days before the process was to begin, you announced that you would not arbitrate under any condition. The conflict resolution attorneys were as shocked by your announcement as I. I had 1 hour to decide whether to mediate and run the risk of not reaching an accurate binding decision. The alternative was to break all communication with you and go public in some way. I chose to give mediation a try. Morris. That hearing was supposed to be kept confidential, and I therefore cannot refer to any tape or transcript of the proceedings. Brown. I hereby give you permission to tell anyone anything that transpired at the mediation. Will you and Steve be equally open? Morris. However, it is not true that Steve was caught lying, as you claimed. Brown. Hours after the mediation, I began to make an accurate and detailed memorandum of what happened and who said what. The following exchange between us relates to whether or not Steve was caught lying. The words in brackets were not spoken at the mediation. They are included to clarify or for clarity or amplification. I asked Steve if he had recently mailed a letter asking for criticism of me. Austin looked puzzled and said he had not. I looked him in the eye, waited for a few seconds, and then said he had done so. A few more seconds of silence. You even sent a draft of what you wanted said, but asked him to put it in his own words. You suggested it's a, quote, Walt Brown had taken work belonging to others and some people were bothered by it, unquote. Finally, you said there was no need to contact Walt Brown. More silence, while I decided whether to mention my source's name. You sent such a letter to so-and-so. Austin then said that he had made a phone call to so-and-so. I contradicted Austin, saying, no, you sent a letter, and that letter was read to me over the phone. I repeated the gist of his letter. Austin finally agreed that he had. I asked him why he had not contacted me first if he felt I had done something wrong. Austin did not answer. I told him doing so would be the biblical approach and might have been surprised had he done so. And he might have been surprised had he done so. I then asked Morris, Henry, were you aware that Steve was doing this? Henry, were you aware that Steve was doing this? Morris stammered, but didn't answer. This spoke volumes, and then said, this is an example, Henry, of derogatory and damaging things from ICR being spread about me. Finally, with a puzzled look on his face, Morris seemed to recall hearing about some contact being made with so-and-so. Austin then told us what so-and-so said. Again, I had to contradict Austin. So-and-so only declined to make a statement. I know because so-and-so sent me a copy of his letter back to you. Austin was silent. Austin had been caught lying. I didn't dwell on it, but everyone in the room heard it. I have always been impressed with how sincere Steve Austin sounds when denying any wrongdoing. Even with the evidence of his false statements in front of him, his denials have sounded so convincing that I wondered if somehow the evidence was wrong or if he had fooled himself. It is always best to follow the evidence. Henry, if you and Steve have a different recollection of what was said, please spell it out in some detail. Then we can discuss it in depth. I asked for such a response from Steve and Peter on September 6th, but have heard nothing. In a phone call I had with Steve on August 4th, I brought up the lying episode. Steve's only response was, I don't want to talk about it. Morris. Neither is true that he deliberately and deceitfully broke our mediation agreement. If you're referring to the delay of getting an errata sheet inserted into the first printing of the Grand Canyon book, The delay was at least as much your faults as Steve's. Brown. Completely wrong. Attachment A lays out the chronology of Steve's delaying and misleading tactics. Since I sent you a copy of it on November 18th, you know exactly what I am referring to. On July 5th, I got Steve 7 pages detailing the errors in his book that he related to our controversy. They included a suggested wording of the errata sheet. On July 25th, he wrote back saying he was extremely busy and that the first printing of Grand Canyon Monument to Catastrophe will soon be exhausted. In other words, he was implying there was no need for an errata sheet. The stonewalling continued for months. Although Peter Robinson had sent copies of all our correspondence, he said and did nothing. When Peter finally wrote Steve and me on September 21st, no mention was made of an errata sheet, even though that was the key element of our mediation agreement. Morris. We could not prepare an errata sheet until the two of you could agree on as to what errors were to be corrected. And this agreement was never achieved. In fact, it finally had to await Peter Robinson's compromise statement because you and Steve never could agree on what it should say. Brown. The ball was always in Steve's court, as I outlined above. He maintained for months that an errata sheet was not needed because the books were almost gone. When Peter first mentioned the errata sheet on November 14th, it was too late. By then, Steve was saying only 144 books remained. Morris. You have considered the possibility that you yourself breached the June 21st mediation agreement? Have you considered the possibility that you yourself breached the June 21st mediation agreement? Why was your board member, Bill Ball, making statements in July to Dr. Russell Humphrey and Robert Walsh concerning these mediation discussions? Brown. I explained this in detail to Steve and the mediators in a letter detailed at August 1st, 1994. Many at the conference were aware of and talking about our controversy. A friend from a foreign country even wrote me about it after the conference. I don't know who started talking about it since I was not there, but I do know that ICR representatives at the conference was at least 10 times CSCC's. Presumably, the RCR people knew ICR's version of the controversy. Bill Ball said that Russell Humphreys expressed the opinion that I had taken material from Steve. Since Bill knew what had happened, this distortion angered him, and it resulted in him saying a little of what he knew. Both Bill and I regret his comments, as I stated in my August 1st letter. Morris, your letter dated December 14th to the ICR board and technical advisory board now both threatens to disavow its decision and also attacks our integrity. Brown, you're right. Our integrity is at issue, yours, Steve's, and mine. I am willing to place all details on the table so anyone can make a judgment. Are you? Morris, Walter, once again, I would urge you and your board to let this matter rest. That is what you agreed to do on June 21st, regardless of who is at fault, and each of us seems convinced it is the other side. It can only harm the cause to which we both are dedicated to let this argument go on. Brown, you and Steve have made 5 or 6 major miscalculations. Each made it harsher for you to deal with the problem. Please don't add one more to the list by trying to sweep the problem under a rug. The first miscalculation was in March of 1991 when I wrote and asked you to stop the false derogatory comments about me coming from ICR. You personally started it. Here in 1984, or Henry in 1984, as I explained to you in a detailed letter, in that letter I said if it continued, I would need to respond in a broader way. I also offered to meet with you privately to discuss the details. You ignored my offer. The second miscalculation came in June of 1993 when I wrote Steve and asked if he had been telling others that I had taken his material. He denied it. Nevertheless, 2 very credible people willing to testify heard it directly from Steve after a speaking engagement he gave on November 3rd, 1990 in Beloit, Wisconsin. They were shocked. While Steve might have forgotten what he said, he certainly would not have forgotten how he felt. But when I asked him if he ever felt that I had taken his material, there was a long, awkward pause, and finally a not very convincing denial. If this was just a misunderstanding, the first thing one would expect Steve to do would be to talk it over with the two witnesses I named. Steve has yet to do this. Another miscalculation concerning Steve put in his things Steve put in his May 1994 book. While he was obviously trying to protect himself by the words he chose, a mutual friend of the three of us told me that Steve dug the hole he is in even deeper. One falsehood which would catch is Steve's statement on page 109. Post-flood ponding of water east of Grand Canyon behind a tectonic upwarp was suggested as the leading cause to cutting the canyon by Steve Austin and John Whitmore, 1986, page 48. That hard-to-get document says nothing of the kind. As with Steve's backbiting in his 1989 guidebook, this appears to be an attempt to predate what I published in 1989 and what I was saying in large forums during the fall of 1988. When I discussed this with Steve, all I got was irrelevant and in some cases incorrect geological jargon. Henry, you and your local board member ought to study that document carefully, but watch out for attempts to intimidate with geological jargon. I will not list the other miscalculations. They are described in the file. Each involves an unwillingness to recognize and admit a problem, attempts to sweep the matter under the rug, digging a deeper hole, failure to realize what would happen next and understand my resolve. Morris. In the meantime, I'm enclosing a small personal end-of-the-year donation. Oh boy. Even though we disagree on details, I do appreciate the fine contribution your ministry is making to the vital truth of young earth creationism. I trust you will have a good Christmas and New Year. Oh my. Brown. Thank you. I do appreciate ICR's unwavering stand for young earth creation and a global flood. I also hope you and your family have a good New Year. A good way to start the year is to have a board member whose judgment you value study this matter in great detail for at least a week, then give him full authority to choose ICR's course of action out of this conflict. If he agrees with me that serious mistakes were made within ICR and corrective steps are needed, then he will find me easy to work with. Doing so face-to-face in my office would be best since I have all the references at my fingertips and much supportive information. We could jointly complete several short writing efforts quickly and simply. The solution might be similar to the 3 points from the June 21st mediation. If that person does not feel that serious mistakes were made, then the conflict will be presented to a much larger audience within weeks. I am not going to engage in another time-consuming correspondence on this. We have exchanged over 40 letters without resolving this. That is enough. Sincerely, Walt Brown, CC'd ICR and CSC board members. Wow. Memorandum of communication on the book count issue. June 21st, in the presence of the mediators, Austin asked if he could omit the errata sheet on a new printing. Since a new printing will come out soon, Brown proposed that if the errata sheet be omitted, only if there's less than 1,000 copies of his book remained. Everyone agreed. July 5th, Brown wrote Austin and asked, please let me know how many copies of your book were printed and how many remained. 20 days later, July 25th, Austin wrote, the first pre-printing of my book will soon be exhausted. August 1st, Brown faxed Austin a letter and said that the statement of July 25th did not answer the question. Please let me know how many copies of your book were printed and how many remained on June 21st. He also asked how many books were printed and how many currently remained. Brown said he would call the next day for an answer. August 4th, Austin returned Brown's call. Austin said that he did not know the answers, even the number of copies of his book that were printed. Brown asked Austin if he could ask Don Rohr, ICR's business manager, how many books remained. Austin replied, Don doesn't know. He would have to go looking in the warehouse. Why do we need an inventory? We should be working on the content. Why do we need an inventory? We should be working on the content. The books were not inventoried. We are running low. August 5th, Brown wrote Austin that since ICR was not reprinting the book now, it was safe to conclude that more than 1,000 books remained on June 21st. Austin was to contact Brown if that was incorrect. August 22nd, 2 weeks later, Austin called Brown and said that he just counted the number of books in the warehouse. Only 750 copies remained. He could not say how many remained on June 21st, how many were printed, or when they would reprint. Brown explained why the last two questions would allow us to estimate how many books remained on June 21st. August 29th, Austin wrote, less than 800 copies of the book remain. What? It was only 750 a week before. Less than 800 copies of his book remain. Thus, we need to prepare for the second printing of the book almost immediately. September 6th, Brown wrote Peter Robinson with a copy going to Austin and discussed in detail the book count issue. We needed to know how many books remained, not how many were in the warehouse. Many books are in packing and shipping areas. Brown explained that Don Rohr almost certainly had the answer at his fingertips. Robinson did not respond in any way to the problem. September 27th, Brown called Austin and asked if he would join Brown in a conference call to Ron Rohr and ask how many books remained. Austin was adamant, I will not. Brown said that he would then call Don Rohr himself. Austin said that Rohr would tell Brown, it's none of your business. Oh my. September 28th, Brown called Dan Rohr and explained why he needed to know how many copies remained. Rohr said that more than 1,100 books remained in August. An inventory is taken each month. Let's read that again. September 28th, Brown called Rohr and explained why he needed to know how many copies remained. Rohr said that more than 1,100 books remained in August. An inventory is taken each month. 1,100 books. So that's more than 1,000, which was the cutoff for not having an erratus sheet. So the plot thickens. And again, you can have all this information for yourself. Again, this is on the timeline. The timeline, we'll just back out of here. This is the timeline. We're going to back out so you know how you can get in. This is on the timeline that we were looking at. Let's see, what was the date on that? That was December 29th, 1994. So that's the letter we read, December 29th. 1994. So it's going to be in here somewhere. Brown. Yeah, that's it. That's what we read. Well, letter Brown to Morris. Okay, so then to get to this hydroplate timeline, just back out of there. And it's on up here on the hydroplate time. And the way you get that, oh, that's right. Oh, you go into the hydroplate theory, hydroplate.org. Here's the resources going down into hydroplate controversy. And then you hit the timeline, which is an amazing tool where you can read everything in the proper order. So let's back out of here and let's take a look. Okay. And again, okay. So why are we spending time on this? Well, this has to do with a theory that explains 25 major features, and it's making accurate predictions, and NASA discoveries are validating it. And it's not being discussed. I wish somebody could give me a logical reason why not to discuss a theory that's making accurate predictions. And I think one of the reasons is this can of worms that we're looking at. They don't want to discuss it because they have to deal with this. Well, actually, you wouldn't even have to deal with this. We could ignore this thing if they would discuss it. You know, we've tried for months to get CPT and HPT guys to have a roundtable discussion. You know, we were trying this over a year ago. have a roundtable discussion, look at the strengths and weaknesses of each theory. And it's just they haven't done it. And so this might be one of the reasons, but if they would, we don't have to deal with this. Let's talk about the strengths and weaknesses. Let's let science advance. And so that's why we're doing this. We don't want to, again, tar or feather anybody. We don't want to hurt any organization, but we do want a theory to be discussed that's making accurate predictions. And for whatever reason, it's not happening. And they're still saying terrible things about Walt Brown and his theory, even this year, 2025. If you want to see what the emails flying back and forth between the sides are, there's a video out there called Jousting Flood Models. It's on the Solidify Your Faith YouTube channel, where you can see, what we're trying to do. We're trying to get a discussion here, and you can see the questions that they ask about the hydroplate theory. One of the geology, experts asked, well, how does granite turn into basalt? And I asked him, where did you ever hear that? I've never heard that. And yet that's his question. So he clearly doesn't understand the hydroplate theory. And that's one of the geologists, an expert, lead scientist that people are depending on to give them the accurate advice. So that's where we're at. And so again, it doesn't appear like the top is going to change, even though I think the tip top at ICR is really good. The president involved hydroplate people to come in and present. And I think that's great. But there's been resistance to being discussed, in other circles. And so again, this is going to have to be a bottom up. This is going to be a grassroots movement, because clearly the people on top, there's nothing happened. This happened 31 years ago. These emails or these letters were going back 31 years ago. And so nothing's happened in 31 years. Is this going to hurt the thing? Could we lose, It's like, well, we don't have any farther to go. But anyhow, let's take a look. Okay, see what the comments say here, if there's any worth repeating. Okay, let's see. What is this? Yeah, we just discussed this. We're just trying to get science to advance. That's what we want. Let's take a look at this theory. You can go into the Hydroplate Week of Celebration. Yeah, we'll show you this. Let me share you where you can go get some more information. And I encourage people to go into the Week of Hydroplate Celebration. It's on YouTube. And then just search blackballed. Or maybe you can even do it with black. Can you do it with black? We'll test that out. Nope, it's got to be blackballed. The title of the talk is Why Was Walt Brown Blackballed? And then you can hear it. You can see it yourself. And it's pretty sad the way Walt Brown was treated. And so we just want that situation to be rectified. We want people to honor him instead of slander him. And he's the Isaac Newton of our day, and he's been kicked to the curb by evolutionists and creationists alike. And that's a tragedy. And we're trying to fix the tragedy. If a man makes a mistake and doesn't correct it, he makes another mistake. And there's been a lot of mistakes made here, a lot of misinformation. And that should, let's drop out of here. Yeah. And so that there's been a lot of mistakes made here. So again, I thank you for taking a look into this, and I encourage you to start asking questions. When you go to hear creationists speak, when you go to the creation museums, when you have an opportunity, even if they're speaking on a podcast, put them in the comment sections. What do you think of the hydroplate theory? Why isn't the theory that's making accurate predictions being discussed? Will you put it into your flood museum? Put it in your museum. Will you allow us to think about flood models instead of just memorize what you're presenting? I mean, that's what the evolutionists do with their blind chance dogma. They only present one idea. And as Christians, we should have a higher standard than that. If there's two theories out there, present them both. Let people think. Set an example for the blind chancers. And even Walt Brown set a tremendous example. He was friends with Bob Dietz, who was one of the founders of plate tectonics. He coined the term seafloor spreading. And yet they could be friends and they could discuss their theories. We can't even get a discussion with a catastrophic plate tectonic proponent. There's people that want to know more about the flood models. They want to know, but there's resistance inside their organizations. And there's a saying out there, sometimes science progresses one funeral at a time. And hopefully that's not the case here, but who knows? So again, the grassroots movement would help, and there's an avalanche of truth coming. The hydroplate theory is a theory that makes 25 major accurate explains 25 major features on Earth and in the solar system, such as the mid-oceanic ridge, how plateaus formed, how mountains formed, why the near side of the moon is pounded instead of the far side, why the lava flows are on the near side, why rounded boulders are in asteroids and comets. And so then and it makes astoundingly accurate predictions, like what they'd find in a comet or an asteroid, or where they'd find, water under oceans, just incredible. Salt on Mars, made these predictions. And then now NASA discoveries are validating them. So we have, as a creationist, we have everything we need. We've got there's more evidence against the Big Bang and evolution than ever before. There's more, the Big Bang's fallen apart, the origin of life has fallen apart, evolution has fallen apart, and I would submit plate tectonics is falling apart, and this information is more easily accessible than ever before, and just with the internet, and it's broken into bite-sized pieces like never before. Some incredible fast-hitting, entertaining videos that get you up to speed really quickly. Okay, we've even got a theory that's making accurate predictions. We've got a professor at the U.S. Air Force Academy that goes along with the hydroplate theory, and other PhDs. We've got everything we need, except there's not enough people, except the creation organizations. They're ignoring all of this. They're ignoring the accurate predictions. They're ignoring that. And so that's a domino that needs to fall. And I'm just waiting. Which one of the big museums is going to put the hydroplate theory in there? They're going for second place because there's one in Broken Bow, Nebraska, Boneyard's Creation Museum. They've got the hydroplate. But now the race is to which one's going to let people think about the flood models. And to think, you need to see both models so you can come to an informed conclusion. And Thomas Chamberlain, he wrote about this over 100 years ago. He says, there should always be multiple competing hypotheses. So then people can sharpen their analytical skills. They can compare and contrast. They can, think independently. And yet he says otherwise they just memorize and conform. And in the secular museums, you just memorize and conform. They don't put a creation model out there. It's just a blind chance model, which takes a lot of faith. But yet in the creation museums, they don't let us think about flood models. They just have their catastrophic plate tectonics, which is a secular model sped up. And they're ignoring a theory that's making accurate predictions. And that theory also has more biblical support than catastrophic plate tectonics. And so which museum, and my guess it's going to be Boneyards again, they're going to have a display there comparing the hydroplate theory with catastrophic plate tectonics. And they're going to have a display. And I suggest that they start with predictions. If your theory doesn't make predictions, it's weak science. And just put the predictions that are made, the predictions that are confirmed, and the biblical support. That would be a powerful display in creation museums. And so again, which creation museum or center is going to allow people to think about flood models? Stay tuned. The one who does it, they're going to be they're going to be leading the chart, the avalanche of truth that'll follow. And the ones that resist, they're going to get bowled over by this avalanche of truth. And people, it's going to hurt their donations, I would guess. If you're just pushing this theory, secular theory, and ignoring a theory that makes accurate predictions, whoever's going to swallow their pride and put it in their museum first, I would guess that their donations would go up. I would support that. Give people an opportunity to think. Yeah. So basically, you want to lead the charge, or you want to get bowled over by the avalanche of truth? It's up to you. And you can play a big part of this by sharing these videos online, by cutting them up, making them into shorts, by commenting on creation speakers online, asking public questions in person and in private, and it's time for this theory to get some traction so that people stop doubting that there was a worldwide flood. They can stop doubting, that the Bible's not true. And you've got a powerful tool here, and we need to equip Christians with it. And people who resist it, it's very disturbing. I don't respect anybody who wants to limit thought, especially if it's a theory that makes accurate predictions. And people who want to see it, who want, the injustice to be done, I have so much respect for them. So much respect for them. But there's resistance inside their organizations. And there's even creationists who don't even want to be seen on camera asking questions about the hydroplate. They think it could impact them financially or for whatever reason. There's a tape out there, but they didn't give us a green light to show it. Okay, and there's also a guy out there. He won't make hydroplate theory videos because it might impact his business. because a major creation organization might stop doing business with them. So there's coercion out there, and I don't respect anybody who wants to coerce silence about a theory that's making accurate predictions. So that's where we're at. I hope you're enjoying this series. It'll be interesting to see what happens next. I know there's going to be another actor coming into the scene, Pastor Kevin Lee, and so it'll be interesting to see. So the saga continues. The truth is coming to light. And thank you so much for taking time to look at this. And I look forward to seeing you at the next video as this saga